What is going on, everyone? Thanks for entering the lobby of Hobbies. I'm Jazz, and on today's episode, I'm bringing you another Kickstarter preview. This one is set to launch September 21st. Now, this is for a game called Critical Care. This is designed by Omari Akil and our very own Dr. Lakshman Swamy. Now, this one is brought to you by Zintensivist Games, and I want to give them a shout out for sending us this preview copy for us to check out. Now, understand everything you're going to see today is going to be in prototype form, so it's subject to change. The rules might be subject to change, but I'm going to do my best to give you a nice overview to figure out whether or not this game might be up your alley to check out and back on Kickstarter. Now, this one is a cooperative game. It's all about taking on the role of ICU doctors, where you are trying to heal and provide therapy for the patients that are in your intensive care unit by bringing in specialists into your unit, by giving them various therapies to help heal their ailments for whatever their diagnosis might be. But you only have a week to get them the correct care that they need or prevent them from coding. Now, understand this game is intense. Like I said, we are in an intensive care unit. So if you're fans of TV shows like House, Grey's Anatomy, and ER, this one might be right up your alley. So let's get into it. Alright, now Critical Care is a cooperative game for 1 to 4 players that plays in about 45 to 60 minutes. That's all going to be dependent on how intense your ICU is. But I'm going to break down how the game is played over the course of the 4 rounds that happen, or 4 phases that happen during each round. Each round is consistent of a day, and there are 7 days, so you're playing this game over the course of a week, trying to heal your patients that are in your hospital. Now, every player at the beginning of the game is going to receive a patient chart that's going to look like this. That's going to have various types of injuries and crises that your patient is going to receive. You're going to each get randomly dealt a patient. For example, I have Miss Mondell here, and she is going to start off with 2 brain injuries, and those are going to get added indicative of these brain injury tokens to her patient chart. She's also going to receive a diagnosis. She has liver failure, and we'll talk about how those diagnoses work throughout the game. But once everybody has received their patient, and they have put their starting injuries on their patient, play is ready to proceed. Each player will receive a hand of 6 therapy cards that they're going to be using during the therapy phase. But play starts first off with the rounding phase, where players are going to look at their diagnosis card, and they're going to have ongoing rounding effects that happen, which means that your patient is going to receive these injuries at the beginning of every rounding. So when you go to check on your patients, when you do your rounds, you're going to see that this patient, for example, who has liver failure, is going to receive 1 blood injury, 1 inflammation injury, as well as another brain injury. So right now, my patient has 3 brain injuries already on her, and there is no room for any more. In this situation, if ever I had to add another brain injury and I cannot, or any other type of injury that I cannot add, I'm going to have to roll the injury die, and whatever is indicated, for example, a blood injury here, I would then add the blood injury instead to my patient. So over the course of the game, depending on how you manage your patient chart, you may potentially cause risk for other injuries and complications to happen to your patient. So during that rounding phase, you're going to add any injuries to your patient and then take off any injuries from your patient. You're going to be taking off injuries dependent on what therapy cards you might have previously placed from subsequent days or rounds during the game. You will see briefly that some of these therapy cards on this left-hand side are going to have different types of injuries that will be removed during the rounding effect. For example, this pressures medication will remove during the rounding phase 2 heart icons from your card. It also has an instant effect that when played will also remove 2 heart injuries from any one patient. So that's how rounding works. After the rounding phase happens, every player at the table, every doctor at the table is doing this simultaneously. Play will then proceed into the complications phase. How complications work are if your patient has one of these crisis tokens on them on their patient chart, you will draw 1 complication card for every crisis token on your patient chart. Thankfully, my patient does not have any crisis, so I wouldn't have to draw for complication. But let's just say she did, and I had to draw for a complication. I would read the complication and see what type of patient it affects. This one says it's encephalitis, so it affects patients that have brain injury. So if I had to draw for crisis or draw for complication, my patient would have been affected because she does have brain injury. And then I would look to see what the immediate effect is, fulfill that immediate effect. In this case, it's not good. It's either add more brain injury, add inflammation, or instead of adding either of those, I can add a crisis to my patient. But if my patient also had meningitis, I would additionally add more brain injury. So you can see that the complications do not get fun. But being that I didn't have to draw for it, I wouldn't have to pick that up. But let's say I drew it and it didn't affect my patient, that card would immediately get discarded. But there are some situations where some of these complications have an ongoing effect. So that card, if it did affect my patient and it had an ongoing effect, it would get placed to the left-hand side of my patient chart. And during the rounding phase, that ongoing effect will be another injury token or crisis token that's going to get added during the rounding phase. So once players draw for complications, they're going to proceed into the therapy phase. Therapy is going to be done by treating the youngest patient in the ICU first. What you're going to do is the doctor who has that patient in front of them is going to first draw for their pager alert. Their pager goes off and they're going to read out loud what that pager alert says. For example, this says family discord. So in family discord, you would remove a therapy card if it's already been, it's been placed onto your patient, if it impacts crisis from any one patient. So many of these pager alerts are not good. A lot of chaos is going on within the hospital. Pagers are going off and doctors are getting called left and right to tend to other things. And sometimes there might be some miscommunication, some, mistreatment, misdiagnosis within the hospital that can cause some craziness and cause other patients to get injured. So after drawing for your pager alert, players are going to proceed into the therapy phase by playing cards from their hand out onto the patients, either their own or to the other patients at the table. And they can play up to 12 hours worth of therapy cards. At the top left-hand corner, you will see that the therapy cards range from anywhere from 3 hours all the way up to 12 hours. So you can play up to 12 hours worth of cards, and you can play them onto your patient or to another patient, either for an immediate effect or for an ongoing effect. Anytime you play for an immediate effect and it removes an injury token from your patient, those injury tokens would get added to your critical care board that's in front of you. If it has an ongoing effect, the ongoing effect stays out in your therapy area, and during the rounding phase, for example, during the rounding phase, this one says that it would remove any one icon. It's a wild token, so it can remove any one injury token, whether it be a crisis token or an injury token, from your player board. Now, when you remove icons or injury tokens from during the rounding phase, they go back to the general supply. The only time they go to your critical care board to be used to pay during the specialist phase, and we'll talk about that shortly, is when you use it for its immediate effect and you're removing during the therapy phase. So any therapies that you play either stay out in front of you, and again, you can play up to 12 hours worth of cards during your shift. And what you could either do, if you want to save a card maybe for another player, you can play it to the therapy board in the center of the table, because maybe it might help a fellow doctor in the ICU. Whatever cards you do not play or choose not to play, those get discarded from your hand, and then you would draw a new hand of 6 cards, and play will pass to the next doctor with the next youngest patient. After all players have played during their therapy phase, play will proceed into the specialist phase. During the specialist phase, players are going to look at the available 5 specialists in the center of the board, and they will be able to spend any tokens that are in their critical care area collectively to be able to call these specialists down into the ICU. For example, you can call an occupational therapist if all players can each spend 3 tokens of any kind here. So it says pay 3 wild, so any 3 tokens you want, and you can bring the occupational therapist into your ICU. And during the specialist phase, you can activate this specialist, and it says once per patient during the specialist phase, you may pay any token, and if you do, you can gain a crisis token onto any patient's recovery bonus. Now you will see that every patient has this area here that's a recovery bonus, and you can add crisis tokens to this. Whenever you receive 3 crisis tokens onto your recovery bonus, during the game, you can spend those 3 tokens to be able to use that special ability. For example, Miss Mandel here says, when you spend your 3 crisis tokens, you can remove 1 injury from every single patient in the ICU. So it gets, pretty powerful stuff here with these recovery bonuses that happen. So after play ends of the specialist phase, you will refill that specialist deck if any of them have been removed from the available cards, and then we will proceed on to the next day, and we will continue going day by day, phase by phase, until the entire week has been played out. To win the game, players must clear their patient chart of all the injuries on there. When they do, they can flip over their diagnosis. That patient can no longer be injured or receive any tokens, and then they no longer have to worry about providing therapy. But those doctors can still on their turn provide therapy to the other patients within the ICU. So you're trying to heal all of the patients in the ICU before the end of day 7. And if you don't, you lose the game. Another way you lose the game is, for some reason, if you either have to draw and place a 6th crisis icon onto your chart, you would have to draw for a code blue. You would also draw for a code blue if all of your injury tokens have completely filled your board and you cannot add any more. You will draw a code blue for that patient. You will look at what it says, and it will say that players have to collectively spend a set number of injury tokens from their critical care board to be able to save that patient from coding. Or in some situations, they might have to discard a specific specialist with a specific icon from the specialist board out in front of them to be able to prevent that code. If they can't, players lose the game, and it's all about trying at another day in the ICU. So who is this game for? This game is definitely for fans who enjoy cooperative games that have a very intense, very critical type of chaos going on throughout the game. So if you enjoy that, this might be one to check out. If you're a fan of medical terminology and understanding medicine, this might be up your alley too. So fans of like ER, House, Grey's Anatomy, this might be the type of board game that you might want to check out and see if this is something up your alley. So this one again is coming to Kickstarter September 21st. Again, this one is from Zintensivist Games, designed by Omario Keel and our very own Dr. Lakshman Swamy. So check it out.